When I first moved to Pine Hollow, it felt like I was stepping into a different era. The pace of life was unhurried, a stark contrast to the bustling city I'd left behind. The folks here were warm and friendly, and it didn't take long for me to adjust to the simpler, rural lifestyle. I found a cozy little house and secured a job not far away. The neighbors were a mix of longtime residents and a few recent arrivals, each with their own unique story. Before long, I found myself immersed in the community, joining local events and making some solid friendships. One of the most intriguing people I met was old Mr. Grayson. He owned a sprawling farm just a few miles down the road. His daughters had all moved on to bigger cities, and he eventually sold the property and retired to Florida, leaving behind an estate that piqued the interest of many buyers. After Mr. Grayson left, the farm sat abandoned, adding a strange, almost haunting quiet to the area. The locals couldn't stop gossiping about who might take over the place. Eventually, a new family from up north, rumored to be quite wealthy, bought the estate. The property included an old farmhouse, a barn, several outbuildings, and over 200 acres of rich, fertile land. The farm had thrived under Mr. Grayson, but after his daughters left and he aged, he decided it was time to let it go. Even though his daughters were worried about his health, he was in good shape and stood by his decision, leaving them with little choice. I couldn't help but chuckle at their situation. They seemed a bit too high and mighty for my taste. One day I was driving down the road and spotted one of Mr. Grayson's daughters, stranded with her fancy Cadillac, steam pouring out from under the hood. I pulled over to offer some help, but she panicked and wouldn't even roll down the window. It was raining and bitterly cold, so I hiked up to the top of Grayson Hill to find a cell signal and called the sheriff's office. "Why didn't you help her out yourself, Luke?" Deputy Tom from the sheriff's office asked when he answered the phone. "I tried, Tom, but she wouldn't let me near the car," I explained. "Well, you'd better do something. It's freezing out there," Tom insisted. All right, let me grab my raincoat. It's dark, wet, and she's probably scared out of her wits," I replied. "If you hurry, I'll save you some of the barbecue leftovers from the station," Tom tried to bribe me. "Fine, Tom, I'm on my way," I grumbled, knowing the food might just be worth the hassle. About 20 minutes later, Tom and I arrived back at the scene. The woman was still there, crying in her car. Tom introduced himself, and she finally rolled down her window. "Ma'am, do you need some assistance?" Tom asked gently. "Yes, please." The car started smoking and then just died. "I couldn't reach anyone on my phone. I'm so glad you're here," she said, clearly relieved. "Actually, it was Luke here who found you. He's quite handy with cars, too," Tom added, gesturing towards me. I quickly diagnosed the problem, a busted radiator hose. "You'll need a new radiator hose, ma'am. I suggest calling AOA. Tom can drive you home and they'll take care of the car." But she panicked again. "I can't just leave it here. My husband would kill me," she cried. "Luke, why don't you tow it for her?" Tom suggested. It was late and the weather was awful, but I couldn't leave her stranded. "I'll take it to my shop and park it safely behind the fence. Does that work for you?" I offered. "Oh, thank you. We'll pay whatever you charge." "Officer, could you take me home?" she asked, addressing Tom with the utmost respect. Tom helped her into his patrol car, but then got a call about a wreck on Route 12 and had to leave. "Sorry, folks. Duty calls. I'll come back for that barbecue later, Luke," he said, rushing off. "Make sure you lock up this time," I reminded him teasingly. "You're never going to let that go, are you?" Tom grumbled. "Not as long as I can still smell that burnt pork," I shot back. "Mrs. Thompson, are you ready to go?" I asked after finally learning her name. She and her husband had just bought the old Grayson place. When we pulled up to her house, the lights were out. "Why is it so dark?" I asked. "The power went out. Didn't you notice how dark it was on the way here?" she replied, sounding worried. "What are you going to do now?" I asked her. "I don't even have a flashlight or lanterns," she admitted. "Well, Mrs. Thompson, you might want to invest in a generator. Mr. Grayson had one in the barn. Is it still there?" I inquired. "I'm not sure. We haven't had time to check," she answered. "If it's there, it should be hooked up to the main power line," I explained. Luckily, we found the generator still in place, chugging along, but it only had about 4 hours of fuel left. "You should be fine until the power comes back, but I'd recommend getting a barrel of diesel just in case," I advised. She nodded, jotting down notes. "I'm going to get your car now. Here's my card with my number. If you need anything before your husband gets back, give me a call." Your car will be at my shop. The address is on the card. Good night, Mrs. Thompson, I said. I can't thank you enough, she replied, clearly grateful. Don't mention it. Have a good night, I responded. After making sure she was safe, I called my girlfriend, Sarah. Where have you been? Why didn't you call? Sarah demanded. Sorry, babe. The sheriff asked me to help with a car breakdown. I'll be home in about an hour and a half, I explained. They'd better pay you well for making you work in this miserable weather, she fumed. Don't worry, I'll get what's coming to me, I assured her. It seemed like just a simple favor at the time. But I didn't realize there was much more to the situation than I first thought. A year ago, Sarah started acting like we were on the brink of poverty, and I could never quite figure out why. After towing the car back to my lot, I finally made it home. Sarah had already gone to bed, leaving a note that dinner was in the microwave. I had a quick bite, took a shower, and passed out until the alarm went off the next morning. The rain had cleared and the day was bright and warm, a welcome change. With not much going on at the shop, I managed to fix the car before lunchtime. Just then, a man in his 40s, dressed in a sharp suit, walked into the office. I'm Ben Thompson. I need to arrange to tow my wife's car. Who's the best mechanic in town? He asked, turning to my assistant, Jake. Jake pointed at me and said, You're talking to him, Luke Hayes. I couldn't help but grin as I spoke. Sorry, Mr. Thompson, we're not making fun of you. Just the whole Thompson and Hayes thing, Jake explained, referencing the famous family feud. Thompson smiled, catching on. Let's hope we don't end up feuding. I left my 6-shooter back in New York. I melted mine down and turned it into a garden spade. How can I help you? I replied. I need to get my wife's car towed. Do you know someone who can handle that? Thompson asked. No need, I fixed it up this morning. It just needed a new radiator hose and some antifreeze. Have your wife stop by before 6, and she can drive it home, I informed him. Thompson looked surprised. How much do I owe you for the work? Nothing. You don't owe me a thing. We're neighbors. Down here, we don't charge for helping each other out, I explained. He looked a bit puzzled, so I clarified. If you wanted to rent some equipment, then sure, I'd charge you. And if I needed legal advice, I'd expect you to charge me. But small favors are different. Thompson nodded in understanding and later returned with his wife. She was younger and more attractive than I had anticipated, and she thanked me repeatedly until I finally asked her to stop. Just call me Emily. We're neighbors, after all, she said, extending her hand. I introduced her to Jake and Myra, my assistant, who was more than eager to give them a tour of our equipment and the big event tent we often rented out for weddings. Meanwhile, at home, Sarah was getting restless again. She was eyeing a new car, longing for something like the Thompsons' Cadillac. Her 2-year-old Chevy Malibu, which she'd insisted on getting at the time, no longer seemed to satisfy her. I reminded her. We agreed not to trade it in for at least 4 years. This thing's practically worn out with 39,000 miles on it. I need a new car, she argued. You don't need one, Sarah. You want one. We can't keep up with the Joneses. Thompson's a lawyer, and your car is fine. If you really want a new one, you can buy it yourself. But don't put my name on the paperwork, I said firmly. I knew what she was up to. Her credit was terrible, and she'd defaulted on a car loan and credit card debt back when we were dating. I'd helped her out with the car loan, but refused to touch her credit card debt. I've never been a fan of credit cards. They're a trap, pure and simple. But you have 2 credit cards, don't you? She shot back. Yes, but they're for business. I use an American Express when necessary, and the other one twice a year just to keep it active, I explained. Before we got married, I had her sign a prenup to keep my house and business out of any shared assets. The house technically belonged to my parents. They left it to me when they moved out to my sister's place in California. Sarah assumed we'd formalize the transfer, but I had everything lined up just in case things went south. I'd started my business by doing subcontract work for builders. I got tired of driving 45 miles just to rent equipment, so I invested my profits into buying my own gear. For 3 years, I reinvested everything I made, and by the 4th year, I'd paid my parents back. By the time I met Sarah, I was proud of what I'd accomplished and determined not to lose it. We met at a Christmas party for local contractors. I was bored, but decided to go anyway. Sarah was there with someone else, but when we danced, there was an instant spark. As I was leaving, the hostess slipped me Sarah's number with a knowing smile. Call her, she whispered, kissing me on the cheek. I intended to call, but work got in the way. A week before Christmas, she walked into my store, chatted with Myra, and pointed me out. I'm here to pick up my rental, she said, handing me a playful note. It read, male, good-looking chaperone for a Christmas party. 5 hours, pleasant conversationalist, good dancer, kissing skills to be determined, willing to be trained, delivery to the specified address. I couldn't resist. We went out for coffee, and Myra insisted I buy a new suit for the occasion. So, we headed to the mall, with her husband tagging along for entertainment. After trying on 8 suits, she declared one the winner. Then came the shirt, tie, socks, and shoes. You're not going to pick out my underwear too, are you? I joked. Dark blue silk boxers, Myra replied without missing a beat. You want to feel as good as you look. Please remind me to fire you someday, I quipped. Only if my severance package includes costume modeling, she shot back. If I beg, will you let us go home? I pleaded. Maybe if you promise to get a haircut tomorrow, she replied, while her husband laughed at my predicament. Feeling rather dapper, I rented a Cadillac Escalade for the weekend. When I picked Sarah up, she looked stunning in a shimmering green dress with a high slit and a plunging neckline, held in place with some double-sided tape. Despite the bold outfit, she exuded elegance. At the party, she was the center of attention, gracefully handling all the attention she received. During a slow dance, she grabbed my hand, leaving another partner standing alone. No more slow dancing with anyone but you, she whispered as we made our way back to our table. On the drive home, she cuddled up to me, teasing with playful nibbles on my ear at every stoplight. We kissed so passionately that the cars behind us honked to get us moving. By the time we reached her place, the car windows were steamed up. Do you want to come in for some coffee? She asked, and I happily agreed. I settled on the couch, but as I started to doze off, I heard someone clear their throat. I nearly fell off the couch when I saw Sarah standing there, having changed out of her dress. When she said she was getting out of it, she meant completely. I was at a loss for words, and she seemed a little nervous when I didn't say anything. Here's the deal, she began. I like you. A lot. Normally, I'd send you home tonight, and we'd date a dozen times before we had a big night with candles, music, maybe some whipped cream and chocolate. But I really, really like you, so let's say 4 months of dating all rolled into one night. Let's see how this mattress holds up. We spent the next 12 hours together, only leaving the house to grab breakfast. Otherwise, the Escalade didn't move for 2 days. After 2 months of dating, we moved in together, and within 7 months, we were married. We planned to enjoy a few years as a couple before starting a family. Sarah was just 25. I was 29 when we got married, and after 3 years together, I started dropping hints about starting a family. About a year ago, though, Sarah began to change. She became more demanding, more materialistic. Out of nowhere, she decided we needed a new house, even though our current one had 4 bedrooms. When she maxed out a credit card and I paid it off, she didn't speak to me for 2 days. I cut her off from any further spending, but she still managed to stay broke, despite making a decent income. I paid for everything except the groceries, which were her responsibility. Her closet was overflowing with clothes that still had tags on them and shoes that had never been worn. The silent treatment after the car argument lasted 5 days. On the 6th day, she came home and found me pulling her clothes out of the closet. She just stood there, watching silently. I'm not living like this. If I'm going to live alone, then I'll do it alone, I told her. I called your mother. She agreed to let you stay with her for 2 weeks. We'll find you a place by then. I'll cover the deposit, first 2 months' rent, and set up the utilities. You need to learn how to budget and live on your own. She fainted on the spot. I quickly undressed her, laid her on the floor, and wiped her forehead with a cold cloth. When she came to, she looked up at me, confused. Luke, I had the strangest dream. You were kicking me out, but I can't remember why, she said, still groggy. Then she saw her clothes in the suitcases and started crying, begging me not to make her leave. Please, please, please don't do this, she pleaded. I let her cry it out and then told her to wash off her makeup and meet me in the kitchen. She sat down at the table, avoiding my eyes. I'm serious, Sarah. I can't keep living like this. The tantrums, the spending, your refusal to even talk about having a family. I don't know who you are anymore. If you want to leave, then say so. But if you want to stay, things have to change. She admitted she was scared of becoming a mother, haunted by her own childhood. She was the middle child of three, and when her parents split up when she was 12, it left deep scars. I can still see my mom crying alone with three kids. She started drinking and just ignored us. My dad moved halfway across the country. I don't want to put a child through that, she confessed. I took her hand. Darling, I'm sorry you had such a rough childhood, but we're not talking about a full house, just one child. And if we want another, we'll wait at least 2 years, but I promise, I will never leave you. For about 3 weeks, we kept our distance from each other, but gradually things returned to normal. Sarah stopped spending recklessly and even opened a savings account. 3 months later, she proudly showed me the balance. Don't be too impressed. It'll be empty soon, she said with a mischievous smile. I thought she was planning to buy a new car, but instead, she had something else in mind. I'm buying furniture for the nursery, and you're going to paint it, she announced. What? What did you just say? I asked, stunned. She smiled, the kind of smile women have when they know they've just turned your world upside down. We're going to have a son in about 7 months. The nursery needs to be ready, so you'll have to cut back on work, especially near the end. I had never cried in front of her before, but when she told me the news in my office, fresh from the doctor, I couldn't hold back the tears. She looked scared for a moment. Did I make a mistake? I thought this is what you wanted. If you don't, she started to say, but I cut her off with kisses. Myra noticed something was up when we came out of the office later. What's going on with you two? You look like someone slapped you and you both liked it. Myra, can you keep a secret? I asked, knowing full well that she couldn't. She nodded, already reaching for her phone. We're having a baby. 7 months from now, it'll be a boy. Promise me you won't tell anyone. We want to surprise my mom. She muttered an acknowledgement while furiously texting someone. I turned to Sarah. I hope you've already told your mom. She grinned. I checked in with her before I got here. Everyone in town will know by tonight. Sure enough, at lunch, people kept stopping us to offer their congratulations. When we returned to the shop, a banner was hanging over the counter. Congratulations to Luke and Sarah. It's a baby. The pregnancy was tough on Sarah. After 7 months, she was put on bed rest, and her mother moved in to help out. Labor lasted 17 grueling hours before they finally had to perform a C-section. Exhausted, Sarah looked up at me and said, "Never again." I agreed wholeheartedly, and she had her tubes tied before we left the hospital. William Bryan Hayes was born weighing almost 9 pounds, with a full head of black hair just like mine. The nurse said it might change color, but it never did. Becoming a parent is an indescribable experience, beautiful and terrifying all at once. Suddenly, it's no longer about you. Even when they're grown, your world revolves around them. Spontaneous trips and romantic weekends get replaced by careful planning, even for a simple grocery run. Sarah didn't take to motherhood as I had expected. She loved Billy, but would hand him over to me the moment I walked through the door, calling it baby recovery time. I cherished every second I spent holding him, talking to him about our future together. He never cried when I held him, which secretly annoyed Sarah. I'd come home to find him crying, but he'd calm down as soon as I picked him up. I took 2 weeks off after Billy was born, and when I returned to the shop, there was a new sign hanging up. Hayes and Son Equipment Rentals, no junk. Myra and Jake were grinning from ear to ear, and I couldn't help but tear up a little. My computer screensaver had a slideshow of Billy, Sarah, and us as a family. Over time, my friendship with the Thompsons deepened. One day, Emily wanted to rent a tractor for her garden, but I refused to rent it to her since she didn't know how to operate it. Why not? Emily asked, genuinely puzzled. Tractors can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, I explained. I don't want that on my conscience, I said. Besides, you've already got what you need. Mr. Grayson's Yanmar is perfect for your garden. It won't start, Emily replied, clearly frustrated. I knew she'd find someone else if I didn't step in. The battery's probably dead. Tomorrow's Saturday. I'll come by and take a look at it. Oh, I couldn't take you away from your family, Emily protested. They'll be with me, I assured her. That Saturday, I brought Sarah and Billy over to Emily's house. Emily cooed over Billy for a solid hour, holding him the entire time. Sarah was annoyed that Billy had been crying, but he stopped as soon as Emily picked him up. Meanwhile, I plugged the charger into the tractor while Ben and I scouted out a spot for the garden. Are you sure you want her driving the tractor? Ben asked, looking concerned. No, but she's determined. Please, just keep an eye on her and guide her, I replied. We chatted while Emily and Sarah made sandwiches and potato salad. We had lunch and discussed her garden plans before heading to the barn for Emily's first tractor lesson. I walked her through the basics: the brakes, throttle, hydraulics, and gears. Remember, a tractor won't stall like a car. Release the clutch and it moves. If you start in high gear, it can lift the front end, and on a slope, you could flip. Always use the collapsible bar and seatbelt for safety, I instructed. I had her drive in low gear while I walked alongside, giving her directions. She practiced using the hydraulic three-point hitch, and then tried out the rotary plow. Always start with the equipment attached. If you hit a steep slope, the equipment will help keep you from flipping, I advised. Emily made a few passes with the plow, grinning while Ben snapped pictures. Once she was done, I parked the tractor and pulled the key. The battery's dead, but a friend will install the crossbar and seatbelts on Tuesday. Wait until then to drive it again, I cautioned. When can you show me how to use and change the equipment? Emily asked eagerly. Next Saturday, I replied. After exchanging hugs and handshakes, we headed home. Sarah was unusually chatty on the way back. She has a beautiful house. Nothing like Mr. Grayson's old place. Emily mentioned a trust fund and still owns a house up north from her grandmother, she remarked. Good for them. They deserve it, I said simply. Later, I caught Sarah looking up the value of the paintings she had seen at Emily's. She was right. Some were worth thousands. Sarah eventually went back to work. She loved her job, and while we didn't really need her income, she would have gone stir-crazy staying home all day. We had a great time teaching Emily to drive the tractor. Ben learned too, but he wasn't as enthusiastic. Emily planted her garden and even bought a small cultivator. She was overjoyed when she harvested her first string beans and kept expanding the garden despite my warnings. Ben leaves early and comes home late. I need something to do, and I've got plenty to write about on my blog, she explained. Emily started a popular blog called Gone Country, where she humorously chronicled her countryside experiences, sometimes adding a serious note. I ended up appearing in a few pictures and videos as her spiritual advisor in all things rural, which was a bit awkward when Myra started reading it. Emily wanted to be as organic as possible, so I introduced her to a friend who had horses. In exchange for cleaning stalls, Emily got manure for her garden. She dubbed her work outfit the crap uniform on the blog, complete with a photo of her in gloves, boots, and a bandana. She cleaned 3 stalls twice a week, and her compost pile grew. Sarah joined me less frequently on these visits. I often heard about manure, crop rotation, and organic pesticides. I started bringing Billy along, setting his carrier in the shade, while Emily spent as much time with him as she did gardening. As we grew closer, I asked Emily if she ever wanted children. Yes, but when it didn't happen, we got tested. Ben is infertile due to something from his youth. We talked about adoption, but he's not comfortable with it, so I dropped the subject. He's my husband and soulmate. I couldn't imagine being without him. Sometimes holding Billy, I think about what I'm missing. Then he dirties his diaper, and I'm eager to give him back to you, she said with a laugh. One afternoon, Ben joined us in the shade. Luke, I need a favor. My new partners and I are planning a meeting, and I want to set up an old-fashioned Southern barbecue here. Can you and Sarah cook for me? I'll pay you. This is a business meeting, and I want them to remember it. I hadn't cooked professionally in years, and I missed it, so I agreed to help. Ben and Emily were relieved. Thanks, Luke. We'll need tents, chairs, tables, and all that. Emily will handle most of the coordination. Clients will be here, and I want to make a good impression, Ben said gratefully. With just 3 weeks to prepare, Emily met with us daily to plan everything out. My first question was, how many people should we cook for? 80 confirmed, but plan on 100. We don't want to run out of food, Emily replied. How many kids? I asked. No kids. Adults only, she responded. I frowned, and she noticed. What's wrong? Emily asked. Nothing, I hesitated. Spit it out, Luke, she insisted. Okay, I think you're sending the wrong message. This is the South. Family's important. Invite the wives and kids. It'll make a more personal connection. Call them, find out how many kids are coming, get their ages, and plan appropriate activities. A personal call will make a bigger impression than a formal invitation, I suggested. Emily called Ben. Have you sent out the invitations yet? She asked. No, not yet, Ben replied. Good. We need to change them and get the wives' names and phone numbers. I'll explain later, she said. She looked at me impressed. Ever thought about running for office? You'd win with the barbecue vote, Emily joked. No, I've just been to a lot of parties. You learn as you go, I replied with a smile. I grinned as Emily worked the phones, transforming our modest guest list from 100 to nearly 300 people. We ended up hiring 3 local girls to help with serving, while Sarah, Myra, and Jake pitched in to keep things running smoothly. The day turned out just right. Warm, but not unbearable, with a light breeze that kept the heat at bay. We set up the dining tent with fans to circulate the air. Our menu was massive: 400 pounds of pork, 20 chickens, and 2 beef briskets, specially prepared for our Jewish guests, complete with labels for the kosher options. Side dishes included potato salad, coleslaw, baked beans, zucchini casserole, and grilled vegetables. Most of it sourced from Emily's garden. For dessert, we had homemade cakes, brownies, and chilled watermelon for the kids. By the time it was over, I was completely wiped out, but the effort was worth it. We had planned for 300 guests, but 420 showed up, largely due to the kids. Before dinner, everyone mingled for about an hour. The self-serve setup helped maintain a laid-back vibe, and to keep things family-friendly, we didn't allow any alcohol in the dining tent. We did set up a small marquee with 2 kegs and an open bar, but it didn't open until an hour after the meal. The senior partners made it clear that getting drunk was not going to be tolerated. Kids were everywhere, enjoying the games and playground equipment we had set up. Emily and Ben moved effortlessly from group to group, making sure everyone felt welcome. The men discussed business while the women chatted about life. Under each tree, we placed comfortable seating, creating shaded areas for relaxation. I couldn't help but admire Sarah, who looked stunning in a simple sundress, as she mingled with guests who complimented the food we'd prepared. We exchanged countless business cards throughout the day. Toward the end of the event, we gathered everyone in the dining tent for a brief speech. I had set up a small PA system, and the senior partner took the mic. He thanked everyone for coming, praised Emily and Ben for their hard work, and expressed gratitude to Sarah and me for hosting. He surprised everyone by keeping his remarks short. That's all I'm going to say. This event has been so enjoyable. I'm not going to spoil it with a long speech. We've got extra food. Please take some home. And by the way, the ice cream is ready, so let's all dig in. His words were met with a standing ovation. We had ice cream machines churning out chocolate, banana, pineapple, blueberry, and vanilla flavors. Both kids and adults couldn't get enough, despite the inevitable ice cream headaches from eating too fast. Emily's garden tours were a big hit. She even picked ripe tomatoes and beans to share with the guests. Some of the watermelons we'd chilled for dessert came from her garden, and they were a huge hit during the seed spitting contest, which the kids absolutely loved. Sarah nearly had a heart attack when Emily handed her the check. The event had evolved into a full-blown corporate gathering, and Ben's firm footed the bill. There was another check as well, a 25% bonus, along with a handwritten note from the senior partner expressing his appreciation for our efforts. I took the bonus and split it with Jake, Myra, and the girls who had helped out. The rest I handed over to Sarah. She had earned it. Ben's firm specialized in corporate law, and soon enough I started getting calls for more events. The demand was overwhelming, so we decided to formalize the business. Sarah quit her job to take on the role of manager, and she excelled at it. All the equipment rentals went through us, so I promoted Myra to rental manager, and she brought her husband on board after he was laid off. Everything seemed to be falling into place, except for one thing. Sarah was now the boss, both at work and at home. This is on you, Luke. You'll just have to deal with it. And hey, how many guys get to say they spend their days entertaining their boss? She teased, trying to lighten the mood. Sarah started dressing more professionally, and her schedule included evening meetings with clients. We finally made enough money to buy her that Cadillac she'd been eyeing. Saturdays were jam-packed with events and meetings. Sarah handled the client interactions and planning, while I took care of the logistics, staffing, and food prep. We were making more money from events than from equipment rentals. but we barely had time for each other, and the strain began to show. It all came to a head when Sarah started having late meetings. After 3 consecutive Saturdays of her coming home late, I reached my breaking point. "I'm done. I won't cook, I won't plan, I won't even show up if you have another late meeting," I said, my voice firm. "I thought we were supposed to be partners." She shot back, "I care more about our marriage than the business. You need to figure out what's more important, this business or us." I walked away, ignoring her, and went to comfort Billy, who had woken up from all the shouting. I meant what I said. I wasn't going to help with another event if she kept this up. The following month, she scheduled a late meeting on a Sunday, and I stuck to my word. I refused to help plan, coordinate, or cook for the event. It was a disaster, and the clients were not happy. On Sunday, Sarah approached me, waving a white handkerchief in a gesture of surrender while I was feeding Billy. "No," I said, keeping my voice steady. Her eyes widened in surprise. "I want a complete surrender. My conditions or it's over. No negotiations," I declared. I lifted Billy. "We're going to visit Ben and Emily. We'll be back in an hour." Billy adored Emily, and she loved spending time with him. She often babysat him, and one of his first words was, "Emily." She even cried the first time he said it. Billy was learning to walk and would toddle over to her the moment I set him down. When I arrived at their place, Ben had something on his mind. He wanted to talk about an old race car he had found in one of the barns. Apparently, Mr. Grayson had been a racing enthusiast and had sponsored the car, but the engine was completely shot. "Can it be fixed?" Ben asked, hopeful. "No, but it can be rebuilt." "What's got you interested in that old thing?" I asked, curious about what he had in mind. "I'm a huge NASCAR fan," Ben explained, excitement in his voice. "I've always wanted to drive a race car, and this could be the perfect opportunity." "How does Emily feel about this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "She's hesitant, but she's agreed to watch one race." "I just need you to reassure her that it's safe," Ben said, looking to me for support. "It's relatively safe, but injuries can happen. It's not unheard of," I said, trying to be honest while still easing his concerns. We went ahead and rebuilt the car. Ben took lessons from some of the older racers and started competing every Friday night at the local dirt track. Eventually, Sarah and I patched things up, and one night we decided to go watch Ben race. The track was noisy and dusty, but Ben was clearly in his element. Charlie, along with a few neighborhood kids, served as his pit crew. Ben was doing well, leading the race, but then he began losing speed and pulled into the pits. He was fighting off the flu and was clearly struggling in the heat. We got him out of the car and started giving him fluids. Ben was disappointed. He was leading in points and needed to finish the race to maintain his position. Charlie suddenly spoke up. He can have a substitute if he's too sick to drive." "It won't work, Charlie," I said, shaking my head. "The cage is built for his size. I won't fit." "Someone his size or smaller could do it," Charlie insisted, his eyes drifting toward Emily. "Oh no, I don't know the first thing about racing," Emily protested. "You don't need to race," Charlie explained. "Just shift gears, stay behind the pack, and keep out of the way. Ben will still get credit for finishing and keep his points." Ben looked at Emily, hope shining in his eyes. "Do it, honey. I really want that trophy. The cage will protect you. Just be careful." She hesitated but finally said, "Give me a helmet. And what if I crash?" "Not a word about it," I reassured her as we strapped her into the car. "Stay low, keep a steady speed, and they'll leave you alone." "Are you sure?" she asked, nervous but determined. "Nope," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. She hit the gas, sending gravel flying as she headed out. For the first 15 laps, everything went smoothly. The other racers knew to leave her alone, except for one guy who was just behind Ben in points. He saw a chance to knock her out and improve his standing. On the next lap, he bumped into her car, startling Emily. "What the hell's he doing?" she screamed into the headset. "He's trying to knock you out. Next time he comes at you, hit the brakes, then the gas. He'll run into you, but he won't have enough speed to do any real damage. He might even get caught up in traffic and lose positions," I advised her. She executed it perfectly. As he rushed toward her, she braked, and just as he touched her bumper, she sped off. He got tangled in a pileup, while Emily won the lap. However, he wasn't done yet. He caught up and slammed her into the wall. The caution alarm blared and she pulled into the pit, her fender crumpled. Can you fix it? She asked urgently. We could pull it out, but there's no time, so I replied. She was fired up. Rip it off and get me back in there. I'm going to put this guy into the wall, she said with fierce determination. Don't be reckless, I warned as Charlie removed the damaged fender and I buckled her back in. Watch him closely. He'll try something again. Clear, Charlie shouted. And she was back on the track, driving like she was in a stolen Maserati. She saw his next move coming, and I yelled into the headset, Cut left now! She did, and he slammed into another car, causing chaos on the track. When the caution lifted, Emily had moved up to third place. By the checkered flag, she led the lap, but finished seventh overall due to the lost laps. The guy who had tried to take her out finished dead last, dropping even further behind Ben in the standings. Emily got out of the car, yanked off her helmet, and with a playful grin said, How does it feel to lose to a girl? She patted her rear and started giggling, then threw her arms around Ben in a big hug. The guy she'd beaten stood there, speechless, but I stepped in. Be a good sport, I told him. She beat you fair and square. Learn from it. His team, who looked like they were ready to back him up, started grinning and he turned and walked away. Sarah snapped pictures like crazy. Emily was hooked on racing after that, and she used her trust fund to buy a car of her own, entering the women's division. Even though she started late in the season, she managed to win 2 races. Ben finally got his trophy, and they planned to paint both cars with their firm's logos for the next season. Our company logos were on there too. It was a small, outlaw dirt track, mostly for fun, but many successful racers had started on tracks just like it. For Ben and Emily, racing became a shared passion that brought them closer together. As for Sarah and me, what did we have in common? Not much, except for Billy. Our business was booming, and we now had 2 crews. Sarah began dressing more sharply, acting more assertive, and had less time for Billy and me. She joined a professional women's organization and became quite active, meeting for drinks every couple of weeks. I didn't mind, and when she received an award, I was genuinely proud of her. At the banquet, however, when I was introduced as her husband, several of her friends looked surprised, almost worried. I'm not as clueless as they think, I joked later as we drove home. Some of those women seemed shocked when I was introduced as your husband. Do you have a city husband I don't know about? Sarah's face turned red. No, honey. They were just surprised to see you. I didn't make you up, I promise. You should come to these mixers with me more often. Let me show you off. Her explanation seemed reasonable, but something still felt off. We were swamped with work, so I pushed it to the back of my mind. As fall arrived and business slowed down, we returned to working with our regular crew. They were well trained, so we often left them on their own, just checking in to reassure clients. Some of these clients even became friends. One day, Ben's boss called and asked if I could cook for Ben's birthday and a celebration of his racing success. He wanted to show his appreciation and let Ben brag about his racing career. He said I was Ben's best friend outside of work and didn't want to offend me by hiring someone else. How many people? I asked. About 40, just friends. No need for you to be there as a caterer, just as a friend, he replied. I'd love to cook, I said. But let's keep it simple. I'll handle the meat, pork, chicken, and coleslaw. Have the wives prepare the desserts and sides. Ben will appreciate it more. When I told Sarah the date, she seemed relieved. I have an event that day. We've signed a contract. I can't cancel, Sarah said, frustration evident in her voice. I was annoyed. These are our friends, Sarah. If they hadn't helped us throw that first party, we wouldn't even have this business. It'd be insulting if you didn't show up. Check in at your event, make sure everything's running smoothly, then come back. Think of Emily and Ben. Reluctantly, she agreed. I set up the meat slabs and then drove back to the house. Since our properties were connected, Ben and I had built a little road through the woods from my patio to his porch, using quad bikes. Whenever I saw a pink helmet on the railing, I knew Emily was over. The party was in full swing when Sarah called, saying she was stuck at work but would be there in an hour. We were running low on ice, so I volunteered to grab some from my freezer. I had to take Ben's car since mine was locked, but halfway there it ran out of gas. As I walked back, I glanced through the patio door blinds and noticed a couple getting cozy on the couch. Assuming it was just some neighborhood kids, I was about to call the police when I recognized Sarah and one of Ben's younger employees. My first instinct was to storm in and confront them, But Ben, a former divorce attorney, had once warned me against reacting violently to infidelity, explaining that it could weaken your bargaining position in a divorce. Trembling with rage, I forced myself to remember his advice and ducked behind the trees. I called Ben. Hey, buddy, what's taking so long? Should I send Emily over? No, I need to ask Emily something, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. A moment later, Emily, sober and focused, came on the line. Luke, what's going on? I need your help, I said, my voice breaking. I just saw Sarah at the house with someone else. I need a witness, and I need a divorce lawyer. Can you help me? Emily's voice was firm. Stay where you are. We're coming. 20 minutes later, Emily, Ben, and 2 other wives arrived. Are you sure, Luke? Ben asked gently. I showed them the pictures on my phone. One of the women, Julie, spoke up. I'm a divorce lawyer, Luke, a good one. I have my own practice, separate from my husband's. I can advise you and offer my services if you need them. I knew her socially, but not professionally. Emily hugged me tightly, whispering, Think of Billy. Thank you, Julie. I'll take both your advice and your help. What do I need to do? I asked, struggling to keep calm. The hardest thing in this situation is to stay composed. Don't engage them when we confront them. Let me do the talking. Keep your emotions in check, Luke. It'll give you the upper hand, Julie advised, her smile turning predatory. But if he attacks you, defend yourself, especially in front of witnesses. Ben's phone buzzed. They're almost here. Let's go, he said, his tone grim. We set up the scenario. The senior partner pulled into my driveway, as he'd promised to bring the ice. The rest of us waited outside, avoiding the light from the patio door. He knocked loudly. Sarah, are you in there? Luke sent us for ice. We're out. When she didn't answer, he continued, Well, he did give us a key. Come on, boys, I don't like being in someone else's house when they're not here. Inside, Sarah and her lover were scrambling to gather their clothes. The guy bolted out onto the deck, trying to hide in the shadows. When I flipped on the lights, his face was priceless, caught red-handed, holding his pants, shorts, and shoes. 4 cell phones clicked, capturing the moment. Sarah had managed to dress and ran out onto the porch, panic-stricken. The senior partner raised his hand. Not a word. Be in my office at 9 a.m. on Monday. Now go. His voice was icy, leaving no room for argument. He turned and walked away, exuding authority. Emily and Ben sat on either side of me, holding my hands. Julie handed me her card. Come to my office at 2 p.m. on Monday. We'll start from there, she said, giving me a reassuring hug. We returned to the party, though my mind was far from it. I ended up staying in Ben and Emily's guest room that night, unable to sleep. The next morning, Emily woke me up with Billy in her arms. Impossible to sleep with a 2-year-old in the room. It hit me then. I hadn't even considered how to protect him in all this. Emily had picked Billy up early that morning, telling my mother-in-law I was having too good of a time the night before. Watching Billy feed Emily breakfast, smearing syrup all over her face, brought a small smile to my face. Later, when Emily took him to clean up, Ben pulled me aside. We need to talk about what happens next, he said. That afternoon, we held our first strategy meeting. Emily got straight to the point. Are you planning to divorce her? Yes, I admitted, the reality of it finally settling in. It's clear we've drifted apart. She wants the big city life, and I'm a country boy at heart. My roots are here. What about Billy? Emily pressed. I want full custody. I don't think a child fits into her lifestyle. She's more focused on herself, I said, my voice firm. Ben nodded thoughtfully. Billy doesn't fit her lifestyle, but he does give her leverage over you. She might use custody to push for a bigger financial settlement. Julie chimed in. We need to keep this from turning into an all-out war. It's best if we can negotiate a reasonable settlement without escalating things. I didn't see Sarah for 6 days. When I finally came home, there she was. It took every ounce of willpower not to throw her out on the spot. She saw the coldness in my eyes and backed away. Please, Luke, just let me grab my things and see Billy. Just for a little while, and then I'll leave quietly. You can even take my car keys, she pleaded, her voice trembling. I allowed her to spend some time with Billy, but she had been so distant lately that he seemed uninterested. After a while, she asked for her keys to open the trunk and asked if I could help with her clothes. I followed her to the car, but as soon as the engine started, I yanked the keys out of the ignition and threw them onto the driveway. She screamed, "He's mine, and you can't keep him from me!" Billy started crying, not understanding what was happening. She cursed until she noticed Emily filming everything on her iPhone. Emily calmly walked over on her four-wheeler, her presence a steadying influence. "Sarah, leave now. If you want to visit Billy, get a court order. Now get out before I call the police," Emily said firmly. I had more to say, but Billy was my priority. Sarah walked away, still screaming, but Emily recorded every word. The next day, Julie had the footage and filed for an injunction, requiring Sarah to undergo a psychiatric evaluation before she could see Billy again. She moved in with her new lover, who had been fired because of the affair. The firm had used polite language, but the message was clear: no references. He ended up taking a lower-paying job at another firm. I sent a letter to our customers, informing them that I was stepping back from the business, but would fulfill any remaining contracts. After that, Sarah took over. I seriously considered quitting altogether, but Julie advised against it. "You've built a good reputation, and you might want to come back to this later. Plus, it gives Sarah an income, which could be useful in the long run," she pointed out. Sarah got herself a lawyer, and the negotiations began. She wanted the house, but it was still in my parents' name. She also wanted the party equipment, but as per our prenuptial agreement, it was owned by my company, and she couldn't afford to buy it. Julie froze most of our accounts by mutual agreement, allowing only enough money for payroll and supplies. Any profits after my obligations went into an account controlled by Sarah. It was the fairest arrangement we could come up with. Sarah struggled until Julie and her lawyer convinced her to take the deal. She wanted one last meeting to air her grievances, but I refused. By then, her lawyer was the fifth lover she'd had in 18 months. All slick city types, most of them broke. I couldn't say anything about her without ending up cursing under my breath. I stayed civil for Billy's sake. He was turning 3 and barely noticed her absence. In the end, Sarah got the party and catering business, giving me a quarter of the profits. I got full custody of Billy, with broad visitation rights for Sarah, but under strict conditions. No men were allowed around Billy, and she had to follow a set of rules. Emily and Ben became my anchors during this time, helping me navigate my grief and anger. Sarah's mom babysat Billy, but under the condition that if she helped Sarah break the custody agreement, all contact would cease. Emily, with Ben's blessing, stepped in as a surrogate mother figure. Ben even had a picture of him, Emily and Billy, on his desk. People often assumed Billy was his stepson, and Ben let them think so. It helped him appear like a family man to new clients. I surprised Ben by naming him and Emily as Billy's guardians in my will. "You're a family man, Ben. You always have been. You've got an amazing woman by your side. And us, too." I'd never seen a male lawyer cry, but Ben did, and it was touching. I'd dated a few women since the separation, but none of them were serious partners. Emily kept insisting that Billy needed a mother. "He has one," I replied. "But when I find the right woman, I'll marry her fast." I almost found that match in the senior partner's daughter, Sophie, a recently divorced lawyer who had just moved to town. Her father asked me to escort her to a charity banquet. "Do me a favor, Luke. She needs an escort, and she's beautiful, if that helps." I agreed and rented a Cadillac for the evening. Sophie was stunning, barely 5 feet tall, blonde, and fair-skinned. She had a charming, playful personality. Ooh, a real-life redneck. "Do you bite?" she teased as we were introduced. "Yes," I replied with mock seriousness. Ben, Emily, and her parents laughed, setting a lighthearted tone for the evening. It was a prestigious event, and Sophie was a non-stop talker, later admitting that it was a nervous habit. "Do you ever stop talking?" I asked. "Only when I have something interesting in my mouth," she replied, making Ben nearly choke on his coffee and Emily giggle. Emily had taught me how to dance, and Sophie turned out to be a wonderful partner. She danced twice with her father, once with Ben, and spent the rest of the evening with me. While waiting by the bandstand, Sarah approached with her new escort, Robert Morgan. "Luke, it's good to see you. Let me introduce my escort, Robert Morgan. You might know his father, Ben Wilson Morgan. founder of Morgan Bank. I stared at her. She looked rough. She had gained weight, and her escort seemed uninterested in any real conversation. Just then, Emily and Sophie joined us. Sophie kissed my cheek playfully. Do you miss me, love? Good. I want you upset all night. It'll be more fun when we have that crazy, passionate love you promised me, she said, then glanced at Sarah and Robert. Oh, I'm sorry. Who are your friends? Emily had obviously briefed Sophie about Sarah, and they were playing it up perfectly. Where are my manners? Sophie, this is Robert Morgan of the Morgan banking family. And this is Sarah Blankenship, I said, intentionally dropping my last name from hers. A local businesswoman and my ex-wife. I then introduced Robert to Sophie Williams of the firm Williams, Roberts, Howe, and Hatfield. Shall we dance the waltz? I asked Sophie. We left Sarah and Robert speechless as we waltzed away. I whispered to Sophie, Emily told you who she was, didn't she? Sophie snuggled closer. Yes, and some history. Don't worry, I think they're having a rough time now. We finished the dance, and then Sophie pulled me into a passionate kiss. Did she see that? She asked, smiling. Give me a minute for the blood to return to my brain. Yes, she saw it. Thank you. You're welcome, my pleasure, Sophie replied. Later, Robert asked Sophie to dance, and Sarah approached me again. Just for old time's sake, Luke? I'd love to, but I promised my lover all the dances tonight. Sorry, Sarah. Maybe next time, I said, turning her down without hesitation. They were stunned. Emily suppressed a laugh, and Sarah and Robert left without another word. I turned to Sophie. I'm glad you're not staying here permanently. She looked hurt. Why say that? I'm starting to like you. Because if you stayed, we'd always be fighting off others, I said, trying to lighten the moment, but knowing that Sophie's departure would bring more changes to my life. I'd fight to keep men away from you, and you'd fight to keep me away, I teased. She smiled coyly. What makes you think I'd resist? She didn't resist, and soon, we were spending every spare minute together. Emily was adamant about not letting Billy go, so Sophie and I could never spend entire weekends alone. But we made the most of the time we had. Despite her petite stature, Sophie was the best lover I'd ever had, surprisingly strong and flexible. She never revealed her exact age, but I guessed she was in her 40s. She adored Billy and often showed me pictures of her daughter, who looked about 13. My ex has her now, Sophie explained. I gave him more time because soon we'll be 3,000 kilometers apart. Hearing this made me sad, thinking about Billy being so far away from someone who cared about him. To keep busy, I decided to open a barbecue restaurant. Myra was handling the rentals well, so I left that side of the business alone. Running a restaurant was time-consuming and risky, but it turned out to be a success. I even bought 4 food trucks and sent them to neighboring towns 4 days a week. They were a hit. Despite all this, I didn't have anyone permanent in my life and had mostly given up looking. Then tragedy struck when Billy was 9. He would usually get off the bus at Emily's house and ride his four-wheeler through the woods until I got home. Emily would ride with him, wave at me when I arrived, and then walk home. She would feed him a snack, check his schoolwork, and he'd help her with chores around the house. On rare occasions, he even stayed overnight with her. She had a room set up just for him. One day, I got a call that broke my heart. Come soon, Daddy. Emily's on the floor crying, and I can't get her up. Billy's voice was frantic. I rushed over to find Emily lying on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably and unresponsive. I was about to call emergency services when Ben's boss called me. Luke, I need you to check on Emily. Ben had a heart attack and died instantly. We found him in his office. I nearly dropped the phone. Ben was gone, my best friend, Emily's husband, and the center of her world. I held Emily on the couch, rocking her like a baby, and we cried together. Ben's will requested cremation and that his ashes be scattered around the farm. This is the only place I ever felt at home, he had written. The funeral was attended by a remarkable group of people, his clients, racetrack buddies, and members of the firm. Even Sarah came, hugging Emily and offering her condolences. During the visitation, Emily sat with Billy on her lap and Sarah's mother by her side. They had bonded over Billy, becoming very close. Emily's eyes followed me around the room. worried whenever I was out of sight. Ben was 52, older than Emily, but in good health. The doctor said it was an underlying condition, but they couldn't pinpoint the exact cause. After the funeral, friends and family slowly returned to their lives, leaving us to grieve. Billy, Sarah, her mom, and I stayed with Emily for 2 weeks. By the end of the second week, she began to show signs of recovery. Reading Ben's will made everything final. He had included letters for his loved ones. Emily received one she never shared. Another was for Billy to be opened on his 18th birthday. And then there was one for me. Dear Luke, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Thank you for your friendship. You made me a better person, someone who could relax and appreciate life. I was honored to be your friend. I've set up a college fund for Billy. I know you can afford it, but it was my pleasure. He's a great kid, and with your guidance, he'll become an even better man. Take care of Emily. She'll need you now more than ever. I know you loved her and would never hurt her, but she needs love to get through the dark times ahead. I'm sorry I won't be around to see Billy grow up. Find someone to love, Luke, before you give up. Most of Ben's possessions, the farm, investments, went to Emily. He also left money for the dirt track he loved, renaming it in his honor. Emily tried to move on for a year, but eventually she decided to move to Philadelphia. I can't stay here, she told me. Everywhere I look, I see his ghost. Billy cried for 2 days straight, and I shed my own tears in private. Emily had been my anchor for 8 years. She handed us the keys to the farm, asking us to look after it in her absence. I visited every few weeks to maintain the property and check the house. She left the electricity on and installed a security system, but it wasn't the same without her. I focused on Billy, who was starting to make friends and socialize more. Our house became a hub for his buddies, and I made a point to know each of them and their parents, often inviting them over. I dated a few of the divorced mothers, but nothing serious ever came of it. Meanwhile, my businesses thrived. I opened more restaurants and another equipment store. Sarah's business, however, declined without the favorable rental deals we'd had in place. Her chef quit, and eventually, she had to close the business. She ended up working as an office manager for an insurance company, married a lawyer, and then divorced him after 18 months due to her infidelity. She still sees Billy on holidays and birthdays, but our lives had moved in very different directions. I was exhausted from the long hours spent opening a new restaurant when I came home to find Sarah and Billy grinning at me. What? I asked, glancing down to make sure my fly wasn't undone. We have a visitor, Sarah said, motioning toward the door. It was Emily. She flew into my arms, tears streaming down her face. We had kept in touch monthly, and I'd always urged her to come back home. How long do you plan to stay? I asked, holding her tightly. Another 30 or 40 years. I'm home, Luke. I'm not leaving again. I'm tired of city life. I want to see stars instead of smog. I want to see you and Billy every day, and Myra, the guys from the driving range, all my real friends, she cried, leaning on my shoulder. For the first time in 2 years, I felt genuinely happy. We got her house back in order, and although she looked older and a bit out of shape, she started to regain her vitality. Each week she grew stronger, riding her tractor and tending to the garden. Her youth seemed to return bit by bit. Meanwhile, Sarah had moved into a nursing home with a one-bedroom apartment nearby. One day she was transferred to a larger apartment and was shocked when I asked her to send me all her bills. She protested, but I insisted, funding her checking account regularly. Billy and I have needed you, and you've always been there for us. This is payback. You should have a bigger apartment so Billy can spend weekends with you. A happy grandmother is what he needs. End of conversation, I told her firmly. From then on, we ate dinner together every night. Billy spent time with his friends, either at my house or Emily's. After 3 months, Emily and I started dating. We went to movies, concerts, and even danced a little. She visited Ben's old firm, and though she left in tears, they made sure to invite us to all their events. She insisted we were just old friends, but everything began to fall into place. One evening, we sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a light blanket, watching Billy and his friends ride their four-wheelers. The air was chilly, but there was warmth between us. I stopped the swing and looked into her eyes. Marry me. What? Emily looked at me, surprised. Marry me. I've loved you for years. You love me, but you won't admit it. Let's stop playing musical houses and settle down. Tears welled up in her eyes. But our age. I know you're 50. I'm 43. I don't care. I love you, and I will love you until I die. She swayed slightly, sniffling, unsure of what to say. This is an ultimatum, I continued. Marry me, or I swear on Ben's memory, I'll never set foot on this property again. Yes or no, right now. She was silent, and my heart sank as I thought about what I might lose. I was halfway to the porch when she suddenly grabbed me. We tumbled down the steps, and Billy rushed toward us. Emily, are you okay? He asked, concerned. Yes, dear, I'm fine. I just got some good news. Soon I'll officially be your mom. I hope that makes you happy. You've pretty much always been my mom? Now I can say it out loud. I love you, Mom. The wedding and the celebration afterward became the talk of the town for years. Myra pulled out all the stops to make it perfect. We married in the spring, outdoors, in a meadow on the farm. The reception took place under the castle tent. Most of Ben's old friends from the firm were there, and even Sophie, who was visiting her parents, attended. She kissed Emily and told her how lucky she was. I realized then that I had some explaining to do, but that's a story for another time. The guys at the track restored Emily's race car and presented it to her as a wedding gift. The years flew by in happiness and harmony. Billy graduated from college, got married, and he and his wife went into business together. As a wedding present, we gave them my old house, fully remodeled. They, in turn, gave us 3 grandchildren, and Billy named his son Bennett. Sometimes Emily would lapse into melancholy, thinking of Ben. On what would have been their 50th wedding anniversary, I gave her an oil portrait of Ben, painted by a renowned artist. She cried for 2 hours, and then we hung the portrait over the fireplace. The painting captured Ben's solemn expression, but as the evening wore on, with the fire crackling and Emily playing with our youngest granddaughter, I swear I could almost see him smiling.